Virginia has a number of factors that make it a higher vulnerability state.
We're an extremely target-rich environment. Even prior to 9/11, we put together a target list that numbers over 4,300 legitimate targets in Virginia.
Homeland Security is a significant problem in the United States.
We don't know what the next crisis is going to be in Virginia.
One of the problems for law enforcement is that they have a resource that's available that we don't always think about, we don't always recognize.
There simply are not enough law enforcement officers to handle the critical problems involved in Homeland Security. Private security can provide the assets that are needed.
We have to be better prepared to share our resources across jurisdictional boundaries and across geographic boundaries.
Private security is seen as the extra eyes and ears out there that have training, that have the skills, that can lead information to the police department.
They're trained, they're experienced individuals, they're dedicated to the field, and they have the same overall public safety commitment.
85% of the infrastructure of the nation is protected by private security personnel.
Back in the early to mid-'70s, there were a group of people who saw an absolute positive need to increase professionalism, and they saw two requirements. One, to develop some kind of a regulatory authority that would ensure the quality of people who are coming into the industry. And secondly, they needed to standardize training.
A large percentage of the people who actually work as private security practitioners have a background of some kind in law enforcement.
We've got some of the best private security firms in the world.
There is a set of regulations that governs the minimum amount of training that must be given to each individual. Many schools go way above and beyond that training.
That's what we're always looking for, is to make sure that we're putting on the street the most professional security person there is.
One of the things that we have to recognize is private security of today is not the private security of yesterday.
Training standards are to a point where they're truly professional.
I went to Quantico for my 16 weeks of training, learned to shoot, learned about the federal law. Nobody ever mentioned to me that private security was out there. Personally, I think it would be very good if every trainee of any law enforcement agency became aware of the nature of private security today.
The roles of private security and law enforcement are very clearly defined. Private security has a responsibility to observe and report. Their primary function will be to deter crimes and activities from happening.
There is this tremendous pool of trained individuals that is a critical asset that can be called upon at a moment's notice.
So if those two groups work together, then that provides the private security personnel can provide leads back to public law enforcement.
That is an asset, an invaluable asset, having another person out there who is familiar with the Code of Virginia, who has the authority under the code to be able to assist an officer.
They're in position virtually 24 hours a day.
We know the hazardous areas. We know the potential dangers.
We're there. We're already in place. We're familiar with the territory.
They can be the first intel gathering point for the police department, so when we show up, they can brief us on what they have seen, what they have observed, and then we can use the tactics that we use as law enforcement to begin to get in and mitigate whatever the response needs to be.
The state police responsibility is to prevent the next 9/11, to deter would-be terrorists, and then, if heaven forbid it happen, be able to respond. That's not something we take lightly, but it's not something we can do alone either.
Private security guards the transportation networks in the United States. Private security guards the electronic grid that is critical to the infrastructure of the United States. Private security transports the wealth of the country in the armored car services. Private security provides the protection for the private property and the private individuals that law enforcement and the military simply cannot do.
currently there's about 17,000 law enforcement officers. There's over 35,000 private security services individuals in the Commonwealth alone.
It is an environment where police and private security are going to have an awful lot to do with each other, or if they're not, they should.
You need to be in concert and develop relationships with those individuals while you're in the field, because those will become your assets and allow you to protect the larger masses.
We need to have collaborative partnerships. It means law enforcement needs to work with many non-law enforcement public safety agencies in terms of the sharing of information. It means that law enforcement needs to do a better job of working with the private security community, and the private security community needs to do a better job of working with the law enforcement community.
If you don't have a strong network, you're not that valuable. So the networking with local law enforcement, networking with the local service providers is critical to what we do.
Ensuring the security of the Commonwealth requires a collaborative approach between both the public sector and the private sector, whether we're talking about public sector, local or state law enforcement agencies working with their federal law enforcement agency partners, or our private sector security experts who are out there on a day-to-day basis in private facilities and in government facilities providing that level of security.
We've really come to recognize how important it is to bring private security to the table and to interact, and what a vital part of the overall public safety of Virginia private sector security is.
And if that communication and relationship is developed between the police and the private security industry, then the police department can be more efficient and effective in rooting out some of the root causes of crime and corruption within the communities.
Exchanging information, establishing a dialogue, so important that we establish that before there's another attack.
And, you know, there are a lot of simple first steps that are clearly going to have to be taken all across Virginia. One, we need to make sure that there's an ongoing dialogue that is occurring between law enforcement and the private security professionals in their community.
Private security and law enforcement working hand in hand are, in fact, the front line of community-oriented justice and public safety.
Partnership together, the police, private security, and the community will make the community safer.
So we have to adjust our attitudes. We have to adjust our working relationships. We need to recognize that the level of capacity that we find in the private security industry is equal to, in many ways, what we find in the law enforcement community today.
Working together as a team, we think we can help ensure the public safety here in the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Our goal every day is to make sure that we have no weak links out there, whether we're talking about public sector or private sector, law enforcement, fire, emergency medical services, emergency management, whomever it might be. And so from our perspective, we want to make sure that our private security industry in Virginia is fully capable of being the integral, important partner that they are in ensuring the safety and security of Virginians.
Each of us has a very unique role. Private security, public law enforcement. And together, that collaboration is what makes the public safe.
Private security really is the private side of public safety.
We truly are, on a day-to-day basis, the private side of public safety.
In essence, we are truly the private side of public safety.
This truly is the private side of public safety.